Hello, everybody. And now we are going to talk about chapter 61 to 63. All right. Isaiah chapter 61 is a chapter filled with promises of comfort, restoration, and the coming of a new era of justice and righteousness. It's a profound message of hope and renewal, which focuses on the work of the Lord's anointed and the transformation of God's people. Let's understand in detail. Now, the chapter starts with the anointed one, often interpreted as the Messiah or God's chosen servant, which is Jesus, proclaiming his mission. Now, he is sent by God to bring good news to the poor, bind up the brokenhearted, and free those who are imprisoned. This mission includes comforting those who mourn and provide for them with joy instead of sorrow. So, the anointed one's role is to restore and uplift God's people, turning their despair into hope and their mourning into celebration. Now, the year of the Lord's favor. The passage continues the promise that God will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore what was once devastated. This is a promise of renewal for Jerusalem and its people. This chapter envisions a time when God's people will be known as oaks of righteousness, strong and steadfast like that. They will take on roles of leadership and care, building up community and restoring its former glory. There's a new covenant about it made. God promises new covenant with his people. What is that? They will receive a double portion of blessings instead of shame and disgrace. This chapter speaks of an everlasting joy and establishment of a new righteous community. The descendants of God's people will now be recognized for their faithfulness and blessing, and their restored fortunes will be evident to everybody. This chapter concludes with a declaration of the Lord's righteousness and salvation. The anointed one, filled with joy, will celebrate the Lord's faithfulness. This chapter ends with a strong affirmation that God's justice and salvation will be evident to everybody, flourishing like a garden. The imagery conveys here a sense of growth, vitality, and fulfillment of God's promise. That is what is highlighted in the last part of this chapter. All right. So, chapter 61 is a message of profound hope and renewal. It highlights the mission of the anointed one who will bring healing, comfort, and restoration. And this chapter also assures us of God's commitment to rebuild and renew his people, replacing their shame with joy and providing them with a future filled with blessing and righteousness. Now let's talk about Isaiah chapter 62. Chapter 62 again is a powerful passage that focuses on the promises of restoration and the future glory of Jerusalem. This chapter is full of hope and celebration, emphasizing God's commitment to his people and the transformation of their future. Now, this chapter opens with a declaration that God will not rest until Jerusalem's righteousness shines brightly and its salvation is evident to all. The chapter describes Jerusalem as a beautiful crown in God's hand, symbolizing its special place and future glory. God promises that Jerusalem will no longer be called desolate, but it will be named, "My delight is in her," and married, reflecting the restored and cherished relationship between God and his people. This shows us that God is committed to bringing about a big, bright, and honored future for Jerusalem. Now, the chapter speaks about the watchmen on Jerusalem's wall, who will never be silent or rest. They are tasked with reminding God of his promises and pleading for Jerusalem's restoration until it becomes a praise on the earth. This indicates that the community's active role in seeking God and advocating for his promises is also very crucial in bringing about the transformation and fulfillment. So these watchmen are going to play a very important role. Now, God promises to restore Jerusalem and make it prosperous again. This chapter assures that God will bring in the riches and blessings that were once lost. The people of Jerusalem will be called a holy people and redeemed of the Lord. This section emphasizes the transformation from past disgrace to a future filled with honor and divine blessing. The chapter concludes with a call for joy and celebration. God's restoration of Jerusalem is described as a time of great joy, where God's people will be filled with happiness and peace. This new era will be marked by a deep and fulfilling relationship with God, characterized by celebration and acknowledgement of His goodness. All right. So Isaiah chapter 62 is nothing but a chapter filled with hope, restoration, and future glory. It highlights God's promises to transform Jerusalem from a place of desolation to a place of honor and joy. All right. Okay. Now let's talk about Isaiah chapter 63. It is a very important chapter that reflects on God's judgment, mercy, and redemption. It addresses the themes of divine justice, the suffering of the God's people, and the hope also for future deliverance. Let's see. The coming of Savior. This chapter begins with a dramatic scene of a figure coming from Edom with crimson stained garments, which symbolizes judgment. This figure is identified as the Lord, who has come to execute justice. The red garments symbolize the bloodshed in the battle against evil. God is portrayed as a mighty warrior who brings justice for his people. This image shows that God is powerful and that he will act decisively or wisely against injustice. Now, after the scene of judgment, the chapter shifts to a reflection on God's past kindness and compassion. The prophet recalls in many ways God has been good to his people, including leading them through the wilderness, guiding them like a shepherd. Despite their suffering, the people are reminded of God's past mercies and the enduring love he has always shown for them. This section highlights that even when we face difficulties, God's past faithfulness reassures us of his ongoing care of us. Now the people cry out to God, cry for redemption. They cry out to God asking why he has allowed them to suffer and why he seems distant. They plead for God to look down from heaven and see their distress. They remember the times when God was near them and acted on their behalf. This cry is representing a heartfelt plea or request for God's intervention and a desire for him to restore their situation and bring some relief. How does God respond to this cry? Well, although this section continues into chapter 64, where you will have more detail, but it's important to note that God's response to the cries of his people is also about his promises to come and restore. God acknowledges his suffering, but assures his people that he has not abandoned them and will always act. So, Isaiah chapter 63 is nothing. It's a chapter that intertwines themes of divine justice, compassion, and hope. It presents a powerful image of God as both a warrior who brings justice, but at the same time a compassionate leader who remembers his people's past sufferings. All right. So this chapter includes a heartfelt cry from the people for the redemption and God's intervention. With this, we conclude chapter 61 to 63 of Isaiah. I hope you will read the Bible, the chapters, and then practice the MCQ questions, which is given in the link below. All the best.